Have you ever noticed that the most important moments in your life never come wrapped in comfort? They come dressed in awkward. That first time you tried to pray out loud, it felt awkward. That time you had to apologize when your pride was screaming not to, it felt awkward. That moment you shared your dream with someone who didn't see it yet, it felt awkward. You ever notice how the stuff that really changes your life never comes wrapped up in easy? It never comes looking polished, perfect, and put together. It usually shows up looking clumsy, uncomfortable, and inconvenient. That's why so many people miss it, because growth doesn't feel glamorous when you're in it. Growth feels awkward. Think about it. The first time you learned to walk, you didn't glide across the floor like you'd been practicing for years. You stumbled, you wobbled, you fell down, and it wasn't pretty. But those awkward steps were proof that you were stepping into something greater. Awkward is not a sign you're failing. Awkward is a sign you're growing. We want smooth, we want easy, we want confidence before we step out. But that's not how growth works. Confidence doesn't come first. Awkward comes first. Every great thing God wants to birth in your life is going to demand that you walk through something that feels uncomfortable. Think about the first time you tried to have a hard conversation you didn't want to have. You were fumbling for words. Your voice was shaking, your hands were sweating. That's awkward. But awkward was the doorway to healing. The first time you tried to stand up for what you believed in, you felt out of place. That's awkward. But awkward was the doorway to courage. The first time you dared to dream about a life bigger than the one you were settling for, it didn't fit. That's awkward. But awkward was the doorway to vision. I wonder how many times we've backed away from growth just because it didn't feel natural. We thought if it was really meant to be, it wouldn't feel this weird. If I was really called to do it, it would come easier. But what if the very thing that feels unnatural is the thing that's pulling you into the next level of your destiny? Growth is uncomfortable by design. That's why stretching hurts. That's why stepping into new territory feels foreign. That's why faith will sometimes make you feel like you're out of place, out of your league, out of your comfort zone. Because if it was comfortable, it wouldn't change you. Don't mistake awkward for absence. Just because it feels off doesn't mean you're out of alignment. Don't mistake awkward for weakness. Just because you don't feel strong doesn't mean you're not being strengthened. Don't mistake awkward for wrong. Sometimes awkward is the exact evidence that you're in the right place, doing the right thing, headed in the right direction. Picture it like this. Every seed starts buried. It doesn't look like anything's happening. The soil feels dark, tight, and uncomfortable. But under that pressure, the seed is stretching, breaking, expanding. What feels like restriction is really preparation. The seed has to push past the awkward to step into the light. Some of you are in that exact place right now. You've been planted in something that doesn't feel like it fits. You're in a season that feels unfamiliar. You're trying to step into something you can't quite figure out yet. Don't despise it. Don't run from it. Don't give up because it feels strange. This is what growth feels like. The enemy would love to convince you that awkward equals inadequate. He'd love to whisper that because you're nervous, you're not ready. Because you're stumbling, you're not strong. Because you feel out of place, you must be out of purpose. But he's lying. Awkward is not a sign you're in the wrong place. Awkward is proof you're on the edge of breakthrough. Everything you've ever admired in someone else, strength, wisdom, courage, resilience, it all had an awkward beginning. Nobody skips it. Nobody gets greatness without growing pains. So don't resent the season that feels weird. Respect it. Receive it. Because awkward is shaping you for what you ask God to prepare you for. So take the step, say the words, start the thing, even if your knees are shaking, even if your voice cracks, even if you don't feel ready. Growth is waiting on the other side of awkward. And when you look back, you won't even remember how uncomfortable it felt. You'll just remember that the doorway you dreaded was the very one that led you into the life you were praying for. Because awkward is not your enemy. Awkward is your evidence. Awkward is your invitation. Awkward is the doorway to growth. You ever notice how faith never feels like the picture we paint of it? We think faith is supposed to feel strong, bold, and unshakable. But the truth is, faith usually feels wobbly. It feels like stepping onto ground you can't see. It feels like your legs are trembling under you. Faith feels awkward before it ever looks powerful. The first time you step out, it doesn't feel like a victory march. It feels shaky. It feels risky. You don't know what's going to happen. And that's the point, because if you knew, it wouldn't be faith. Faith is the courage to move while you're still uncertain. Faith is obeying before the outcome is obvious. Remember Peter stepping out of the boat? The story sounds powerful because we know how it ends, but imagine how it felt in the moment. A fisherman standing in the middle of a storm, trying to figure out if the voice he just heard was really worth betting his life on. He puts one leg over the side of the boat and then the other. You think he felt confident? You think he felt steady? No, he felt awkward. Every step on that water must have felt impossible. Every ripple under his feet was a reminder of what should have swallowed him, but he walked anyway. And it didn't look powerful until he pushed past the awkward. That's the tension we all live in. We want our faith to look strong without being willing to feel weak. We want it to look powerful without first feeling awkward. But God does his greatest work in that space where you're trembling. Because faith that feels natural isn't really faith, it's just familiarity. The first time you forgive someone who hurt you, it feels awkward. You don't feel like it. You don't even know if the words coming out of your mouth are genuine. But in that shaky step, God releases freedom. The first time you pray out loud, your words get tangled. Your sentences don't flow. You wonder if anyone's even listening. That's awkward. But that awkward moment is where intimacy with God begins. The first time you give generously, you don't know if you'll have enough left over. It feels shaky, uncertain, but in that awkward step of obedience, you learn that God is your provider. Awkward is the evidence you're moving into new territory. Awkward is the bridge between where you are and where you're called to be. Awkward is the birthplace of power. Don't wait until it feels steady. Don't wait until you feel ready. Don't wait until all the doubts are gone. If you wait for steady, you'll never step. Steady comes after you step. Strength comes after you stumble forward in obedience. That's why faith looks powerful in hindsight, but feels awkward in real time. Abraham looked like the father of faith when he lifted the knife on the mountain. But imagine the awkwardness of explaining to his wife why he was taking their only son up there in the first place. Moses looks powerful when he raises his staff and the sea parts. But picture the awkwardness of holding up a stick while an army is chasing you. Every miracle we celebrate started in a moment that looked ridiculous, because faith always feels awkward before it looks powerful. And maybe that's where you are right now. You're stepping into something new and it feels shaky. You don't feel like a giant of faith. You feel like you're fumbling. You're wondering if you heard right. You're second guessing yourself. Let me encourage you, that doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're right where you need to be. Faith was never about the absence of fear. It's about moving forward in the middle of it. So go ahead and take that awkward step. Start the conversation, fill out the application, write the book, say the prayer. Show up even when you don't feel ready. It may not look powerful right now, but every awkward step you take is pulling you closer to the moment when God will show his power through your obedience. One day when you look back, what felt shaky will look steady. What felt awkward will look anointed. What felt like weakness will look like the very place God showed his strength. Because faith doesn't start strong, it grows strong. Faith doesn't start steady, it learns steady. Faith doesn't start powerful, it looks powerful after you've walked through the awkward. That's the invitation. Don't stop because it feels shaky. Don't quit because it feels strange. Don't run because it feels awkward. Keep stepping, keep trusting, keep believing, because the very step that feels so uncertain right now is the step that will one day show the power of God in your life. Faith feels awkward before it looks powerful. Obedience sounds easy until you're the one who has to do it. It sounds simple when we read it on the page, but living it out is a whole different thing, because obedience doesn't usually line up with what feels comfortable. In fact, most of the time, obedience feels downright uncomfortable. And that's why so many of us miss the breakthrough we've been praying for, because it doesn't come through what feels natural. Breakthrough hides in uncomfortable obedience. Think about it. The instructions that lead to the miracle almost never make sense in the moment. March around the walls of Jericho 7 times instead of fighting. That's uncomfortable obedience. Fill jars with water when the wine has run out. That's uncomfortable obedience. Throw your net on the other side of the boat after fishing all night and catching nothing. That's uncomfortable obedience. The miracle was never about the instructions themselves. It was about the willingness to obey what didn't feel natural. We want God to move, but we want Him to do it in a way that makes sense to us. We want Him to bless us, but we want Him to bless the areas where we're already comfortable. But the miracle is usually waiting in the place that stretches you. It's hiding in the thing that doesn't fit your logic. It's on the other side of what makes you feel out of place. Sometimes obedience looks like forgiving someone who doesn't deserve it. That's uncomfortable. Sometimes obedience looks like giving when you're not sure how the bills are going to get paid. That's uncomfortable. Sometimes obedience looks like staying when you'd rather run, or speaking up when you'd rather stay silent. None of that feels good. None of that feels natural. But that's where God hides the breakthrough. The uncomfortable place is where dependence is born. As long as you can manage it, you don't need Him. But when He tells you to step into something you can't control, you learn what it means to trust. When He calls you to do what you don't understand, you discover that His thoughts really are higher than your thoughts. Obedience doesn't mean it will make sense. It doesn't mean it will feel right at first. It doesn't mean people will applaud you. Sometimes it means you'll look foolish. Sometimes it means you'll feel out of place. Sometimes it means you'll have to walk away from something you wanted to hold on to. But every time, uncomfortable obedience leads to undeniable breakthrough. Maybe that's why so many of us stay stuck. We keep praying for God to change our situation, but we're unwilling to step into the strange instructions He gave us. We want the miracle, but not the discomfort. We want the blessing, but not the obedience. But the two can't be separated. The blessing is tied to the obedience. What if the very thing you've been resisting is the thing God is trying to use to release your miracle? What if the phone call you don't want to make, the apology you don't want to give, the step you don't want to take, that's the thing standing between you and the breakthrough you've been begging Him for? Uncomfortable obedience doesn't feel good in the moment, but it always produces fruit in the end. You don't see the harvest the first time you plant the seed. You don't see the wall fall the first time you march around it. But each step of obedience is stacking up, building momentum, creating the very conditions for the breakthrough you've been praying for. So don't quit because it feels strange. Don't stop because it feels awkward. Don't walk away because it doesn't add up. The miracle is usually one uncomfortable step away. It's not about how big the instruction looks. It's about whether or not you'll trust the one who gave it. And when you trust Him enough to obey, even when it feels out of place, even when it makes you nervous, even when it costs you something, you position yourself for a breakthrough you could never create on your own. One day you'll look back and realize the thing that felt so uncomfortable was the very thing that unlocked everything you were praying for. Because that's how God works. He hides miracles in places that force you to depend on Him. He hides power in moments that stretch. He hides breakthrough in uncomfortable obedience. Awkward isn't something we like to admit. We'd rather cover it up, hide it, or polish it until it looks like confidence. But what if awkward is exactly where God does His best work? What if the very thing you think disqualifies you is the very thing He wants to use? God uses awkward to build authenticity. What feels like weakness can become the exact place He shows His strength. We live in a world that celebrates highlight reels. Everyone wants to look strong, sound polished, and present perfect. But perfection doesn't change people, authenticity does. And authenticity doesn't come from looking flawless. Authenticity comes from being willing to show up even when it feels uncomfortable. Think about Moses. When God called him to speak to Pharaoh, his first response wasn't confidence. It was but I stutter. I'm not good with words. In other words, that feels awkward. And yet God chose him anyway. Not because he was polished, but because his weakness would become the perfect stage for God's power. Or think about Gideon, hiding in a winepress, feeling small, calling himself the least in his family. That's awkward. That's not the profile of a mighty warrior. But God called him anyway, because authenticity doesn't begin with what you can do. It begins with who God says you are. The moments we feel the weakest are often the moments God is setting us up to be the most real. Because when you don't have the strength to impress, all you can do is depend. When you don't have the polish to perform, all you can do is be honest. And that's the place where authenticity is born. We think strength looks like standing tall with everything figured out. But sometimes strength looks like showing up even when you feel shaky. Sometimes strength looks like admitting you don't have it all together. Sometimes strength looks like being awkward enough to let people see the real you. It's the awkward that makes it authentic. It's the nervous prayer that shows your heart. It's the broken words that carry more weight than a perfect speech. It's the tears you didn't plan that tell the truth louder than your polished presentation ever could. You don't have to fake strong for God to use you. You don't have to hide your weaknesses for Him to work through you. In fact, it's often the very thing you're trying to cover up that He wants to uncover and redeem. Because authenticity isn't about impressing people, it's about impacting them. And people aren't impacted by perfection. They're impacted by honesty. That's why Paul could say, when I am weak, then I am strong. Because he learned that weakness wasn't something to hide. It was something God could inhabit. The very thing that felt like a liability became the very thing that proved God's strength was real. Maybe you've been fighting to avoid awkward. You've been trying to keep everything together, trying to show people you're stronger than you feel. But what if the thing you're running from is the thing God is trying to use? What if your awkwardness is the key to your authenticity? What if your weakness is the very stage where He wants to display His strength? The world doesn't need more polished perfection. The world needs more people who are real enough to say, I don't have it all figured out, but I'm still showing up. That's what inspires. That's what encourages. That's what carries power. So stop despising the parts of you that feel awkward. Stop hiding the cracks and flaws. Stop pretending that strength means never struggling. Because the truth is, your struggle is the space where grace shines brightest. God isn't looking for perfection. He's looking for authenticity. And authenticity is built in the awkward. It's built in the weakness. It's built in the moments you thought were too messy for Him to use. So let your awkwardness be the place He works. Let your weakness be the place He shows His strength. And when He does, you'll realize that what you thought was holding you back was actually building something deeper, something stronger, something real. Because God uses awkward to build authenticity. And what feels like weakness is often the exact place where His strength shows up the most.